Hey, one of the greatest powerhouse gifts is tongues. But a lot of times the enemy would like to come out against it. The Bible said, though I speak with tongues of men and of angels, as not charity, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. The enemy likes you to say that tongues is just gobbledygook, made up languages. But actually, it's tongues of men and of the angels. It is a known language, either angelic or manly. And in the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit was poured out, the people who spoke in tongues were speaking in known languages of the people around them. And it is a known language. But a lot of times the enemy wants to make you think it's gobbledygook. I was at Calvary Chapel years ago, going to Old Enfant study, and I doubted my gift of tongues. But one of the ladies there said, Paul, why don't you speak in tongues? And she interpreted. And it was what I was faking, I was saying in my heart. She had an interpretation. I guess I must have had it too. And later on, they used my gift more in the corporate setting, like after glows. And I would give a tongue and somebody else would interpret it, or sometimes I would interpret my own tongue. And it was used in the corporate setting. But a lot of times the enemy wants to come out against it. He wants to quench this gift, but because, like I said, if you're in the pits, you should pray in the Spirit, P-I-T-S. A lot of people are in the pits, but they're not really praying in the Spirit. And when you pray in the Spirit, you're praying the oracles of God. It's great to use the gift of tongues, but there's two different types of tongues, I believe. One is a prayer language, which I believe, maybe some of you don't agree with me, that everybody can get. But there are also the gift of tongues, which you can use in the corporate setting. But when you use the gift of the tongues, you should have interpretation, either you or somebody else give it. 1 Corinthians 14:4, he said, he that speaks an unknown tongue edify himself, but he that prophesies edify the church. I would that you all would speak in tongues, but rather that you prophesy. For greater is he that prophesies than he that speaketh with tongues, except, and that's a lot of people left that out, except that he interpret, that the church may be receive edifying. For if I pray in an unknown tongue, my spirit pray it, but my understanding is unfruitful. And the verse before, that's 14, 1 Corinthians 14:14, but 14:13 said, wherefore let him that speaketh in an unknown tongue pray that he can interpret. And verse 39, 14:39, wherefore, brethren, continue to prophesy and forbid not to speak in tongues. A lot of churches are forbidding the speaking in tongues in the corporate saying, and they shouldn't. Because it says, wherefore, brethren, continue to prophesy and forbid not to speak in tongues. Let all things be done decently in order. Tongues is the gift of today, and it's real. And this video will show that it's real. You will see testimony from Christina Williams and Chuck Smith on how the gift of tongues is a real gift, and often it's a real language that people can hear you speaking for in their language. God bless you. Enjoy this video.
The lady in the middle was our interpreter for that night, and she lives in Florida. She's a Bulgarian married to a veterinarian, but lives in Florida. And she just happened to be, I haven't seen her since the very first time I went to Star Zagora. She just happened to be from Florida visiting with her family during this time. Total accident. And then the lady that's blonde, when at that very first prayer meeting, I said, my throat is really drying up from all the cigarette smoke. They smoke heavily in Europe still. And I said, could you really pray over my throat? Because now I'm going into a big weekend. And they all gathered to pray, but the interpreter was sitting like 2 people away from me. And during the prayer meeting, a lady got up on her knees in front of me, and she began to pray in English, saying, I will uphold you, I will strengthen you, I will keep you. And at the end of the prayer meeting, we were eating, and the lady in the blue says to me, they're all asking if Milena, the lady in the black is named Milena, if her prayer language is perfect English. And I said, what? And they said, well, she doesn't speak any English, but she thinks her prayer language is English. Is it? And I said, yeah, I mean, that was perfect English. And they said, well, you know, she's never had anybody confirm it for her. So I wanted to confirm it. Well, I have to tell you something. I haven't seen Milena since then because she moved to Italy. So God, in his, sovereignty, brings all these people together from that very first prayer meeting. Pepe, who lives in Canada, Sleka, who lives in Florida, and then Milena, who lives in Italy, all happened to be there this time. And it was sovereign. And so Milena, she's a gifted artist, and she's a cake maker, Phyllis. So she gave me this, I'll let you see this afterwards, it's in pencil, a picture of Jesus watching over the sheep. But just remarkable that God would put us all back together. And guess what? She still doesn't speak English. She's fluent in Bulgarian and fluent in Italian and doesn't speak English, but still in her prayer language, prays in English. Is that the craziest thing in the world? So you talk to her, but she understands a little bit, but cannot speak back to you. Is that crazy? But I was so grateful to God that he reconnected us all this time. It was miraculous, really.
I can't remember if it was 68 or 69, but as we were meeting on Pentecost Sunday, and at that time there was probably 45 to 50 of us on Sunday evenings, and we were able to have a much more informal Bible study. I just sat with them and we just shared the scriptures. We were going through the Bible even then, but it was in a very informal way. And at the end of the study, because there was just a very small group of us, as I say, only 50, 60 or so, I said, you know, this is Pentecost Sunday, the Sunday that we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit and the birth of the church. And we had a lady in our fellowship, her name was Lynn, who had a remarkable gift of tongues in that whenever she speaks in tongues, she speaks in French. And so I said, you know, let's just worship the Lord. And Lynn, why don't you just exercise your gift that God has given to you of speaking in tongues, because there's just us here, and it is Pentecost Sunday, and just, you know, as sort of a memorial that this is Pentecost Sunday. So as Lynn began to speak in tongues, speaking in French, I can understand enough of French that I knew that she was giving thanks to God for a beautiful song. Now, because I could intellectually understand some of the French words, I did not make any endeavor to exercise my gift of interpretation, because I was afraid of trying to interpret when naturally I knew some of the words, had sort of the gist of what she was saying naturally, and I was afraid of some kind of a natural, supernatural kind of a hang-up. I might get out into na-na land and not come back, you know, between the two. So I didn't make any endeavor to interpret. However, Kay began to interpret. And it was very beautiful as she was thanking God for the beautiful new song that God had put in her heart. Her love song to Him. And the joy and the blessing of singing of her love for Him. And of course, it was rather significant because she had been singing in nightclubs and did have a beautiful voice. And so it was quite significant that she was rejoicing in a new song that God had given to her, a song of praise and love and all unto Him. We closed the meeting and we had a fellow who was going with this girl in Palm Springs, and she was having some problems. And he brought her down that night that I might counsel with her after the service. So as we sat down to counsel, she was a Jewish girl. She said, before we start talking about the things that I need to talk to you about, she said, I'm curious as to what was going on here tonight at the end. The woman who spoke to the group in French and the other woman who translated for the group what she said. And I said, would you believe that neither of those women know French? She said, no, I wouldn't. And I said, well, it's true. I said, neither of them know French. And I took her to the scriptures and I showed her the gift of speaking in tongues and the gift of interpretation. I said, what you saw was this, what Paul is talking about here in Corinthians, where one speaks in an unknown tongue and another interprets. She said, well, I lived for 5 years in Paris. She said she was speaking the most beautiful French. She said she was using an aristocratic pronunciation. She said it isn't just the common French. She said she had an aristocratic pronunciation. I said, well, what you expect from the Lord, you know. And she said the other lady translated it perfectly. I said, well, I know that she doesn't know French. That's my wife. She said, well, before we go any further, I have to receive the Lord. And so we had the joy of leading her to the Lord as a result of that experience of seeing the genuine exercise of the gift. And here is one of those cases where tongues did become a sign to an unbeliever, as she saw the gift of tongues and the interpretation. It used to be that I spent my vacations in Arizona, in Williams, Arizona, conducting youth camps. That was the only way I could afford on a vacation, because they would give us, of course, our lodging and our food, and so we would go over and I'd conduct these camps in Arizona, and it gave the family a great opportunity to be up there in the beautiful mountains of Arizona around Williams, go over to the Grand Canyon and all. And so every summer I would take my vacation conducting and directing their youth camps there. And we were getting ready to go over. It was summertime, and I was going to take my 2-week vacation over there. And so at this particular year, our daughter Jan, who has had 5 years of French, she took French at UCI and quite fluent in French. She was going to be a girls' counselor at that camp. And so the family, it was after Sunday night, and of course, that was before we even moved out of the little church, and so we had even less there that night, maybe 30 or 40 of us. It's just shortly after 6 months or so after we had started Calvary Chapel. So that the family, we went down, and the church gathered around us, laid hands on us, and prayed for us that God would be with us, use us, and bless us in the ministry to these young people in Arizona. And Lynn happened to lay her hands on Jan and began to pray in the Spirit for her. Now, of course, the interesting thing was that Jan could understand it because she was praying in French. And she was praying that God would help Jan to be a very beautiful witness to these young girls. That God's love would just pour forth from Jan and would make her just a great blessing. And that the impressions that these girls received would be lifelong impressions as a result of her ministry to them. And as she was going on praying for Jan, Jan said, "Dad, I just felt just sort of trembling all over because I realized that this is what the Holy Spirit was praying for me." As Paul said, the Spirit makes intercession according to the will of God. And she said, realizing that, Lynn, not really knowing what she was praying, because she was praying in an unknown tongue to her, yet to Jan, she understood it and said, what a thrill to realize this is what the Holy Spirit was praying for me, interceding for me. And she said, oh, it just was so glorious to know that this is the Lord's desire and prayer for me.